In the first game of this January World Cup qualifier window, the U.S. men's national team went out and put on a comprehensive, albeit, I don't know, a little bit frustrating performance against El Salvador. The U.S. secured the 1-0 win, but the confidence from the fan base has been a little bit all over the place. The reactions are all the way from "this is the worst thing I've ever seen" to "guys, I think it was a pretty good performance." I brought on a man to help unpack these things. This is a man who, at this point, is now the most featured reoccurring guest on in the history of the Yank Report. He is Jake from Fifamerica. Jake, I gotta ask you, you've had a chance to sleep on it, you've had a chance to watch the game again. Are you coming into this video with different opinions than you had immediately after the game?
I'm coming in hot, I'll say that for sure. But I also think that giving myself some space, a few hours between watching the game, watching the replay, I will say watching the replay, knowing the result at the end, I think also helped. And yeah, I think we can all say it wasn't the best performance, but in the grand scope of things, 3 points is 3 points, and we're on our way to World Cup qualification. So a lot of people will have their varying opinions of we need to be winning the group. How can you watch that and say we're going to compete at the World Cup? Well, in 2018, we didn't even make it. So I've been hurt before. I want to get to the World Cup before we start talking about how we'll perform there. And if you take it from that stride, then we're on our way.
Yeah, I mean that's such an odd thing. I always think that's such an odd thing to say, like to take a performance against one team and apply it to like another team. It's like I don't get it, because I feel like the players might be up a little bit more for a World Cup game against like a big traditional power than they would be against El Salvador. But that's besides the point. Let's get into the game that actually happened, something that is tangible and we can actually talk about. So I think the main grade A storyline coming off of this game was the performance of Christian Pulisic, the utilization of Christian Pulisic. I know I watched your reaction video and you opened with a like a 2-minute straight to camera open letter to Christian Pulisic. So give me your thoughts on Christian Pulisic after the game, and maybe if those thoughts kind of evolved a little bit after your rewatch.
Yeah, definitely. It comes down to 3 areas for me, and the first is tactical, because that's a bit more visual. Like, everyone can kind of understand what was happening from a field view. And Christian Pulisic was dropping very deep. He was occupying the same spaces that it seemed like Jesus Ferreira wanted to occupy. I know we might touch on later how Yunus Musa was kind of setting up in the left back spot where Anthony Robinson was shooting up the wing. It felt like that was actually the area where we wanted Pulisic to be stretching the defense, was where Anthony Robinson was setting up. So in my mind, like, tactically, we wanted Pulisic to be playing as a left-sided Timothy Weah, basically, stretching the defense, getting in behind. But that didn't really happen. So I think that's kind of lesson number 1. Tactically, everyone could kind of see what was happening. Now, whether that was Greg's instruction or whether that's some leftover kind of natural way of playing because of Thomas Tuchel and Chelsea, I don't know which one it is, but it's kind of worrying either way. And I'm not ready to press the panic button just yet, but to me, like, that, there are things that are concerning and like starting to become habitual. And that's when I start to worry, is like when it becomes a trend. I think the other 2 things, it's really difficult to speculate on, because we're not in the camp, we don't know them personally, but just his mental state, and I think his body language last night, I have to say, like, I haven't really seen him try and beat a player with speed or change directions really quickly. So I don't necessarily know if that's him kind of holding back and worrying about injury. I don't know if that's, something else. And again, like, all I can say is what I'm seeing and what I think that means. And without kind of knowing exactly his situation, it's hard to speculate. But those are kind of the things that I think are really holding him back. And we saw kind of, I would say, one of his worst performances, not just in a U.S. men's national team jersey, but I'm sure a lot of us have kind of watched on TV or tried to follow ever since he was at Dortmund. It's probably one of the worst Christian Pulisic performances that I've seen him play in any team. But what did you think?
And now, a word from today's sponsor. BetOnline would like to wish you a happy betting new year as we continue our march towards the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains the #1 spot for all betting action in 2022. New year and a new updated desktop and mobile website. Sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, and of course soccer, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available in 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Boy, there's so much there, man. I mean, first of all, you're correct. We don't know whether he was instructed to do that or whether he was just doing that. What we do know is that prior to the game, you know, the big story was Ricardo Pepi wasn't going to be in the game. So Greg did give us some insight there that he wanted Ferreira to drop in and be a little bit of a false nine. So we do know that Ferreira was supposed to be there. And we do know in the post-game press conference, Greg did talk about Pulisic dropping back too much and kind of getting lost in that space and making some poor decisions as to what to do with the ball. And we do know that in the second half, I mean, it was certainly a tale of two halves for a lot of the squad, but certainly for Anthony Robinson. In the first half, everything was coming up the right flank with Serginho Dest and Tim Weah. In the second half, we see space open up for Anthony Robinson, and he starts to cruise down that left flank. And a lot of it was because in the 20 minutes that Pulisic was on the field in the second half, he was actually pressed up the field. And we saw a lot happen from that. There was a lot more chances made. If you look at the XG from the game, I think 3 or 4 of the biggest chances that the U.S. had was in that space between the start of the second half and I would say between the start of the second half and the Zardes and Morris substitution. Yeah. That was whenever the U.S. was at its most dangerous, and it was a result of that left winger being pressed very much higher up the field, more mirroring what Tim Weah was doing. So that gives us some insights that at least at halftime it was seen and something was said, and it was, Christian, get up the field. So whether he was instructed to come back or not, I don't know. I can tell you, like you were just saying, in so many of the games that we've seen before in recent memory, Christian Pulisic is doing that exact thing. He's coming back to the ball and trying to get involved back closer to the center line as opposed to further up the field. And I think maybe earlier in World Cup qualifying, it was something that he kind of had to do because the team didn't have a functional midfield that was capable of beating a press or breaking out or anything like that. But that's not the case anymore. The MMA midfield was tremendous, and we were able to pretty much at will break out. But so many times in that first half, and on rewatch, I would pause every time to locate him on the breakout. So many times you would see the breakout occur and just pass Christian by, where he would try to come to show for the ball, but it was in a space where he didn't need to be showing for the ball, and the play just passed him by. And there were so many instances, especially in that first half, where either Weah or Dest would be bombing up the sideline, and they'd be go to crossing the ball, and it was either Jesus Ferreira or nobody in the box because Christian was just so up the field. It was disappointing that the upside that I got was in that first few minutes of the second half. He was further up the field, and whenever he was further up the field, he was getting a little bit more involved. But you still see this thing where it seems like everybody else on the field, whether it's Musa or Adams or McKinney or Dest or Weah or even Ferreira, whenever they get the ball, it was, it was one touch and gone. They were passing and moving very quickly, very vertical, to steal the phrase from Greg Berhalter. But whenever it got to Christian Pulisic's feet, he was putting the foot on the ball, he was stopping, he was surveying, he was cutting into the middle, and he was dribbling at a host of defenders.
Yeah, it was really weird to watch. And again, the more I think about it and the more I hear other people react to their thoughts, it does make me feel like this is kind of like an ingrained way of playing for Pulisic because of how he's playing at Chelsea. I don't know if we'll get to it, but I want to touch on a few things that you mentioned. The Jesus Ferreira inclusion to me isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was more of just the way that we played stylistically that didn't necessarily make sense. Like, I understand if we're saving Pepi for the next 90 minutes against Canada and then coming back to Minnesota to play Honduras, I understand saving Pepi for that. But if we were trying to play out wide and get crosses into the box, I would have almost preferred Giassi Zardes. Like, Zardes is a better target and poacher than Jesus Ferreira. So to have Jesus Ferreira in the game as kind of a false nine, but he was playing forward as well. He was playing a true nine. And Christian Pulisic in our MMA midfield, you would have expected there to be a lot more link-up play. Now, El Salvador, to their credit, really did well to be very narrow, be very compact.
Oh yeah, very much.
And really forced us out wide. And that was the only way that we could play. We found some success there, but again, it's like we kind of had the wrong personnel for the way that we needed to approach the game.
Now, there were some opportunities later on in the game that came up the middle, and I think a lot of that was due to that tactical change where Christian Pulisic or whoever's occupying that left wing space gets further up the field. It allowed both wings to be engaged, and we were cruising up both sides of the sideline, and that created space in the middle. And we got opportunities like the one that comes to mind right now is Yunus Musa had a run where he kind of ran straight at the defense, and it was shades of that goal that he had over the weekend, but he wasn't able to put the shot in, and there were some instances like that. Pulisic, to his credit, actually did have I think one or two nice runs right in the middle directly at the heart of defense. But anyway, aside from that, the reactions to this game have been absolutely all over the map. I was kind of grounded a bit on Twitter because after the game, I posted this tweet saying, you know, it was a comprehensive victory for the U.S. We dominated. We didn't give up many chances to El Salvador, and yet I'm still feeling a little frustrated and unsatisfied. And somebody commented and said, you know, this performance, we limited their, we were solid defensively. We didn't give up hardly any quality chances, and we were able to convert. We were able to create a bunch of chances of our own. If we play like this, we're going to win the majority of our games against the majority of teams, and it's hard to argue with that.
Yeah, it's true. And at the end of the day, you're going to hear this a million times, but 3 points is 3 points, whether you win by a goal or whether it's 4-0. I do agree. If you watch Greg Berhalter's press conference after the game, I do agree, and maybe I'll get flamed and put down for this as well. He was talking about the amount of chances that we created and not necessarily being worried in that sense. And when we talk about Jesus Ferreira, we should be worried if he wasn't getting chances, but he had two really good chances. And if he goes down and takes a penalty in that first opportunity that he had, if anything else happens in that second opportunity and he puts it in the back of the net, not only are we talking about 1-0 or 2-0 at halftime, but we're also talking about a master stroke of genius to have Jesus Ferreira there. So it's like reality happened, right? We got to halftime, it was 0-0. We didn't put away those chances, but in a sense, the comprehensive victory storyline is true. We did create way more opportunities. El Salvador, to my mind, only had two opportunities really where they could have possibly scored: the Alex Roldan shot and their glancing header in the last few minutes of the game, and those weren't good opportunities. So it's not going to be, you know, the greatest victory of all time when but at the same time, we need to expect this. Like the Gold Cup, for instance, we won that tournament by winning almost every game 1-0.
With an XG of 1, you know, we weren't creating chances in that tournament either.
Yeah, so in that sense, we've been improving. But I do, like, personally, I feel like something was missing last night, like whether it was confidence or just especially getting to halftime. Like, I don't want to put too much on Jesus Ferreira's head, but the fact that we didn't score either of those goals really put a lot of pressure on us at halftime to get that goal, and kind of like time is ticking at that point. We were not lucky, but I would say fortunate to get a goal pretty early on in the second half from Jedi, and it all kind of writes itself from there. But I even thought like the last 20 minutes weren't necessarily the easiest on the heart of a fan. Like El Salvador was starting to play forward when Jordan Morris and Giassi Zardes came in. We got completely disorganized in the way that we were playing. And it could have easily got stolen back, and we could be walking away disappointed with the point.
Yeah, it's true that that last 20 minutes was a bit perplexing. Now, you mentioned being disorganized. I've gotten a lot of comments and tweets and seen this around lately that it was a very disorganized performance and the tactics were off and the player selection was good, but outside of that, it was not a good performance. A lot of criticism of Greg Berhalter. How do you rate Greg Berhalter's performance in this game?
It's really tough because I'm wondering that the main deciding factor for me rating Greg Berhalter at this point is knowing if he meant to play a wider game or if he meant to play, 1-2 touch and playing through the middle. If let's take the earlier piece, so maybe they're trying to play wide. I'd probably give Berhalter a 4 or 5 in this game just because of the way that he set up the team. Jesus Ferreira, again, is probably the third worst poacher on this roster. And that to me is a struggle to understand. When people say we were disorganized throughout this whole game, I think we were the complete opposite. We were very organized. You might have not liked how we organized ourselves or how we set up, but you could tell there was a very rigid organization in, again, Yunus Musah playing out of the left back position, Serginho Dest overlapping and Tyler Adams trying to take over the right flank, our midfield playing very deep. All of those things kind of add up to me thinking that all of that was intentional. So if that's the case, I don't know, 4 or 5. But again, we got the 3 points, and that's the story of Greg Berhalter's tenure. Is everyone knows better than him because we can see it, we can feel it, but we're getting results and we're getting 3 points, and that is hard to argue at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. It is hard to argue with that, and it just keeps happening, man. The team just keeps.
Yeah, it's conflicting. Like there are things that are obviously not wrong, but like unpopular, and like as set as our starting 11 can get, the more and more settled we think that we know the starting 11. You get worried every time that we're about to hear about the roster because Greg's going to do something that is inevitably, seen as wrong by the entire fan base, and then we walk away with a win. So, how can you really argue with that at the end of the day?
No, you're right about the tactics and the organization. I did see a lot of things that I felt were intentional and showed us signs of understanding. Like you mentioned that that outlet pass that is it an outlet pass? I don't know. The pass that Yunus Musah made to open up the break for Serginho Dest that eventually led to that chance that Jesus Ferreira was unable to put away. You saw that. I think we all saw that. But I saw oftentimes, you mentioned Yunus Musah dropping in at the left back. I saw oftentimes it looked like, especially early in the game, we were in the build-up, overloading on that left side, getting Serginho Dest kind of to be out wide and finding Serginho Dest one way or another as that outlet. And he was in acres of space because El Salvador was playing so narrow. And that opened up the whole the whole right flank to either Dest or Weah. Whenever Dest would get the ball, Weah would make that run in behind. Sometimes Dest would make that pass. Sometimes he would take the space and run with it. But it created 5-6 opportunities down that right flank, 5-6 attacking sequences. It was something that was repeatable, and it looked like the team was looking for. It looked like over and over again they would get the ball in that left corner and then look to quickly bring it to the right side and get up the side. I did see, I mentioned this to you on Twitter in the DMs there, but I did see... I was very interested to see how Weston McKennie would be utilized in this game. Whenever I did an interview recently with Joe Lowry, I was asking him about how do you get Weston McKennie into the box, knowing that Christian Pulisic also needs to be in the box, and he kind of gave me some ideas on that. But I thought what Greg did, I'm assuming this is what Greg did, I'm assuming, is that instead of playing McKennie as the left-sided midfielder, which we've been seeing, he switched him and put him on the right side and had Musah be that left-sided midfielder. Assuming that meant that, Pulisic would be able to get into the box further upfield and Weah would kind of give way on that right side, become a little bit wider, and McKennie would be able to get into the box on that right side. We didn't really see it in the game, but what I did see was a couple of times during the break, whenever McKennie and Musah were both getting upfield, I saw a couple times where Musah would look up and find McKinney and just spot him. And then from there, he would reposition himself. Either he would keep running, or he would shade to a different side, or he would drop back to cover on that left side. So those are things that I see that show that this team is on the same page. They're understanding each other. They have a plan. And for the most part, they went out and executed it and created a bunch of chances.
Yeah, I think you can see where that happens. The one that you mentioned where Yunus Musa picks up the ball on, deep left in our side of the field and immediately switches it to Serginho Dest. And if you go back and watch that, he barely even looks up. Like he just picks up the ball and sprays it into a space.
He knew he would be there.
Yeah. And so when you think about like rigid tactics, right? I think a lot of negativity goes to those words, but that's what that means essentially, is like when players get the ball in a certain part of the field, they know exactly what they're about to do. They know exactly where their teammates are going to be. And that takes kind of like the time that you need to think about that out of the equation. And we saw it, like that was the start of the play where Jesus Ferreira should have scored that goal on the back post. So I want people to kind of like understand that while we might not like having, Champions League players, European players play in more of a rigid system to Greg's preference, there are advantages to that. And that was one of them, where you just pick up the ball, you know exactly what you want to do, you know exactly where your teammate's going to be. That's an advantage. Now, on the McKinney piece, I love the episode with Joe. I love what you're saying now, because it's a really interesting wrinkle, which I think backfired on us. And that's where halftime comes in. You need to be able to make these decisions. In the previous World Cup qualifying windows, Musa, Dest, and Timothy Weah were lethal on the right side. And part of that lethality was having Weston McKennie and Christian Pulisic crash the box on the back post. Not only was our midfield a bit deeper, so McKennie couldn't really get into the box, but he wasn't on the right side of the field where he'd be able to crash the box and get to these headers. If we were going to play wide, again, Timothy Weah was really the only one stretching the defense and getting in behind and putting in crosses. There was nobody to get to those balls. You mentioned Christian Pulisic was 10 yards outside of the 18 at that point. Weston McKennie might have been at our halfway line because he's the person that sprung Timothy Weah, or Serginho Dest sprung Timothy Weah. You don't want Jesus Ferreira to be on the end of crosses. I mean, no. It'd be great if he gets there, but like he's not the target. Christian Pulisic crashing the back post is the target. Weston McKennie coming in at the 6-yard box or the penalty spot is the target. And again, if we're going to play the way where we're spraying the balls wide and going into crosses, that's not a bad way to play if you're setting yourself up to play that way. Yeah. And we didn't. It just seemed very dysfunctional to the way that we set up and then our personnel on the field.
And the thing about that is, in the second half, especially whenever we saw Brendan Aronson come on, we saw the left flank open up, and we saw that those long passes in behind that were going to Weah in the first half started going to Aronson, and it did open up that line of play that we're talking about right now. We did see some crosses coming in from that left flank. They weren't always good crosses, and a lot has been made of the crosses that we saw from Serginho Dest and Anthony Robinson. But, speaking of crosses, another big thing that's been missing from this national team has been set-piece delivery and taking advantage of set pieces. And I would say, just like pretty much everything else we've been discussing in this game, the set-piece delivery was really good. And we got some open looks. There were 3 that come to mind. I mean, the first one is the Weston McKennie one, which, boy, I bet he wants to have that back. I mean, that play was set up so perfectly. It was put right on his head. If he puts that away and it's a 2-0 victory, everybody's a little bit happier. But there was another one where Gyasi Zardes had an opportunity, but his header was not very strong. And then another one where Walker Zimmerman had an opportunity, but I don't know what exactly. That play was a little weird. I don't know if you're aware of the one that I'm referring to. It kind of like a defender fell down and the ball kind of went right in front of him, but it like got behind the camera, so we couldn't exactly see. I don't know exactly what happened there, but I thought the set piece delivery was good in this game, and I thought we had opportunities to take advantage of it, but once again, it just didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, Christian Pulisic's going to get a lot of flack for dribbling and losing the ball 9 times, but I don't necessarily think we can look to his crossing or his corner kicks for what we want to, be upset about. And what was frustrating about the first game in El Salvador is that we had excellent chances in front of goal. Miles Robinson missed a header that you would expect him to score. He was going towards goal. It was a curler towards, and he dove, missed the shot. Weston McKennie had a really good opportunity again at the 6-yard box in El Salvador and missed it. So that is a big advantage for the U.S. over most of the Central American teams, and even I would argue Mexico and Canada. We have an aerial advantage and more just a physical advantage. We didn't take advantage of it because we didn't score goals, but I wouldn't necessarily say we didn't create chances from that. So as much as we can talk about the Jesus Ferreira chances, for me, like knowing how good Weston McKennie and Walker Zimmerman are in the air, those were just as good of chances to me as well, and we didn't take advantage of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whenever we look at this, the kind of the meta of this team and think about, you mentioned the first El Salvador game, and just kind of compare and contrast what the U.S. looks like now and how they're playing now compared to how they went into that El Salvador game, compared to how they played in the Nations League. I mean, we're seeing it's so much better than it was. It's the tactics are so much more defined. The build-up play is so much more defined. The interchange is tremendous. They're creating chances which they hadn't before. The big sticking points, and it's a big one, man, is that we want to see Christian Pulisic be that star boy. I was listening to another podcast recently, and the question was asked, like, when was the last time we saw Christian Pulisic dominate a game for the U.S. men's national team? And the person said it was probably that Northern Ireland game. That at this point was about a year ago, and it's hard. I don't know. Maybe you can think of another one where he was like that guy for the U.S. men's national team.
Like that was World Cup qualifying for the last World Cup.
It's been a long time since we've seen him be that guy, and I think that a lot of fans, myself included, are not going to be thrilled until we see Christian Pulisic out there enjoying his soccer, and more importantly, being that fearsome attacker that we know he can be. I mean, whenever the U.S. played Alphonso Davies in the last World Cup qualifier at home, Canada was solid. Canada was good defensively. They were strong. They counterattacked well, but they also had this freak of nature who was one of the handful best players in the world at counterattacks, and they beat us over the head with it, and eventually one of them broke through, and that was the difference in that game. That was the reason why Canada was able to tie that game with the U.S., is because they utilized the strengths of this incredible player, and we're just not doing that with Christian Pulisic. It's a frustrating thing, and it's a trend that I don't know. Can you be happy with a U.S. men's national team that's playing really well, where it's maybe Brendan Aronson or it's Gio Reyna or somebody else that's the star, and Christian Pulisic is just he's just good enough?
Well, the thing is that envy lives in sports fans, and if you look at I wouldn't call Canada our biggest rivals just yet, but they're starting to creep up there, and I think we all know what a force on the field Alphonso Davies can be. Alphonso Davies changes games by himself, and I think what's starting to creep into our minds, or my mind at least as a US fan, is that Tajon Buchanan and Jonathan David might get to that level at some point, and Canada might have 2 or 3 world beaters on their team at the same time. And at the same time, we have a much better, more rounded team. Weston McKennie might get there. Christian Pulisic is still only 23. He might get there. Timothy Weah might get there. Serginho Dest. All these players might get to that level. But it's looking very likely that some of these players on Canada are, reaching those heights quicker. To the Pulisic question, though, there's two sides to this, because we don't, and I mean this in a good way, actually, now, we don't need Christian Pulisic to be at his best or even be on this team to qualify for the World Cup. We do need him, though, in form to be our best possible team. And I think that's what we need to look at now, is starting to, be able to get the best out of him, whether that's in, his right position, whether that's his club situation, whether that's his mental state. We'll give him a break during the Nations League over the summer. Whatever Christian needs in the next 10 months to get ready for the World Cup, we need to support him in doing that. The US will be fine in these World Cup qualifiers if he's, if he has the game that he had last night in the next 5 games. We're still qualifying. It's no problem. But if he has that game in the 3 group stages of the World Cup, we're not going very far. So I think we need to look at this from a short-term and a long-term perspective. He's in a rut. That's very obvious to everyone. That's okay. People go in and out of form. We just need to make sure that, 9-10 months from now, he's at his best, because we won't be the best team that we can be without Christian Pulisic being at his best as well.
Yeah, and it's an exciting time for the U.S. men's national team whenever you're talking about potential future world beaters and you leave out Gio Reyna. And that kind of speaks to, I mean, he hasn't been a part of World Cup qualifying at all, save for that game against El Salvador. And we know the quality that he brings. I mean, in that game against El Salvador, I would say he was the best player on the field, especially the best attacking player on the field. So he could potentially be that guy for the U.S., and we haven't seen him at all. I mean, that's the kind of guy, the caliber of player that we have waiting in the wing, and just what happens whenever he comes back into the mix. How does that affect the group, especially with the way that this group has been moving the ball around, gives us more options in the midfield and in the attack. It's a very exciting time for the U.S. men's national team. But you have been hinting at this upcoming match against Canada. I know it's one that the fans, and myself included, are all just really excited about, really want to win this game. Now, Greg has told us in press conferences that he's not expecting to rotate very much, that his whole scheme with having the game in Columbus was so that, it would be a short flight and a short turnaround and he'd have players available. In this game, he didn't start Miles Robinson, which many would argue is the best center back in the pool at the moment. He didn't start Ricardo Pepi, who many would argue is the best striker in the pool. He pulls Christian Pulisic off at the 60th minute. He pulls Tim Weah off not too long after that. How do you expect Greg Berhalter to approach this Canada game? How do you expect him to line up? And what do you think is going to happen in that thing?
Well, here's what scares me. I talked a little bit about, as much as our starting 11 can settle on a consensus best 11, the more things seem to change within Greg's preference. I don't know if our center back pairing changes. Like, why rest a center back against a team that's not going to attack us very much? I bet you, and this is not to discredit them, but I bet you if we went back and looked at the stats of how far someone ran last night, Chris Richards and Walker Zimmerman are at the bottom of that list. But that's a credit to the team and how well we played and how well we did in possession. In my mind, there's no reason to rest Miles Robinson if you're saving him for another game. I think that conversation does change a little bit with attackers. So I do think Ricardo Pepi comes in. I know I watched your post-game breakdown, and you were talking about how you were anxious about what this means for Ricardo Pepi. And that made me anxious. So thank you very much, Sam.
I am quite anxious. Greg didn't say anything in the post-game press conference that would make me think that there's anything wrong with Ricardo Pepi and this was anything outside of rotation. But yeah,
him not
I am
being
a bit
the substitute, I mean,
weird,
seems a
man.
bit funky.
Weird.
Yeah. So I think Ricardo Pepi comes in, and if that's the only change, I think that would be what most fans would be okay with. And that tells me that there will probably be 2 or 3 other changes. That should be enough to get a result in Canada, and a result in Canada for anyone watching means a draw or better. We will easily make the World Cup in the first 3 spots if we get a draw in Canada and take care of our home games. It's pretty much a guarantee statistically if we can get a draw. If we can get 1 point away in our last 3 away games and take care of our home games, we'll be good to go. The problem and issue that I'm having with Greg Berhalter consistently is that his teams never reach the sum of their parts or become greater than the sum of their parts. And I talked about this in my video today. But you can see how a team like El Salvador and a team like Canada last night against Honduras, those are players, some of them are in good leagues, some of them are in very poor leagues, and yet they come together to be something greater than all of their talents combined. The US and Mexico, actually, for that matter, just continually, whether it's playing down, you want to consider it playing down to your opposition, or just not being as good as you can be together. And that scares me going into Canada in an away game where, to steal a quote from Alexi Lalas, if you've been part of his Twitter spaces, he wants to go there and punch them in the face. And I do too. I really do want that. I feel like they kind of need a message for who still runs CONCACAF. And in my mind, we are still the kings of CONCACAF here. So it's difficult. I'm not necessarily scared to lose because it doesn't necessarily matter for our qualifying chances. I'm more worried almost like at a pride point where I want to get at least a draw, preferably a win, obviously. But like Greg Berhalter versus Herdman for me is like a no-brainer that Herdman is getting way more out of his team, that his teams always look way more motivated, way more organized. And so that's a bit worrying for me going into this Canada game. The one thing that I think we have to our advantage is that Canada is traveling back from Honduras to Canada to play this game. And we have, I think it's like a 50-minute flight from Columbus up to the game. So there's a lot of things that are to our advantage right now. But when I look at kind of like coach versus coach, how these teams play, factoring anything CONCACAF related, it gets very difficult to, predict what will happen. What do you think is going to happen?
I mean, looking back at that game that they played against Mexico, where it looked like the weather was a big impactor on that. Once you put it in and it start messing with variables to that degree, it's going to be interesting. I think the last time the U.S. played Canada, we had a midfield of it was Tyler Adams, Sebastian Lletget, and Kellen Acosta, and it was awful, man. The U.S. really struggled. I think if the U.S. brings out the MMA midfield, which I'm fully expecting them to do so, that's been the indication that I've gotten all the way through from Greg. I think it's going to be difficult from Canada, especially considering they're going to be without Alphonso Davies and very likely going to be without Steven Eustachio, who's a big part of their team. And I think that they're going to be struggling to replace. He's one of those players that, you talk about a player that's a team that's more than the sum of your parts. That he's a guy he's not in a tremendously high league. He's not playing, for Juventus or anything like that. But you put him in that squad, he really reminds me of like a vintage, like Michael Bradley type player who just kind of keeps the pace and keeps it going for that squad.
Verona, Michael Bradley.
Exactly. What did they call him? Generalissimo, something like that. Anyway,
he was the first Captain America.
Absolutely, yeah. So
the first soccer Captain America.
That's going to be tough for them. It's also going to be tough for them because, how do they approach rotation? How do they approach this window? They've got another tough away game coming up. They got to go down to El Salvador. That's going to be tough for them. How do they rotate has always been a question mark for me, if they even rotate. So for me, it's kind of dead rubber right now. The big question I have, and I'm going to put it to you right now because I get to do that because I'm hosting the show and I get to ask you the tough questions and then respond after, is this man that we've been dedicating most of the video talking about, Christian Pulisic. Do you start him in that Canada game?
Yes. I think he's built enough grace with this team and this fan base to warrant one bad game. This, I think, the more we talk about it, the more we're going to inflate what we think the issue is. And the issue is that Christian Pulisic had a bad 60 minutes of soccer. The next time he steps on the field, that doesn't matter anymore. He's still Christian Pulisic. He's still capable of all the things that we know he is. So, yeah, he's still a starter in my mind. He's still starting in Canada because he's the best that we have in that position.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think if you flip it around, and I think about this a lot, I think about the fact that we as U.S. men's national team fans are so obsessed with this squad that we think about every little thing in great detail. We blow up every issue. We care about every single kick, especially whenever it comes to a player like Christian Pulisic at Chelsea. Every moment that he's on the field is scrutinized and talked about. Everything that the coach says in the press conferences is scrutinized and talked about regarding Thomas Tuchel. I mean, think about it on the flip side. If Canada was playing and Alphonso Davies was coming off of this uncharacteristically terrible game where he was tactically bad and technically bad, and it was just bad, and there was questions about whether Alphonso Davies would be starting against the U.S., as Americans, we would be going, are you guys out of your minds? Like, what are you talking about? Why in the world would you not play this guy? He had a bad game, but he's capable of doing things that no other player on your squad is capable of doing. How is this even a discussion? And I wonder if it's kind of the same thing going on with Christian Pulisic right now.
Yeah, it's a good point. We'd be like, yes, please sit him on your bench. We'd love to go up against the second tier. But Canada did, I want to remind everyone, Canada did rest players in their game in Nashville against the US.
Yeah, they did.
Jonathan David didn't start the game, I don't think.
No,
so
he didn't.
It's, it could happen again, and we'll see what happens. We had, I think that was like our highest majority of possession game that we've had in World Cup qualifying so far. It was like 80-20.
It was 62 to 37.
Thank you. I can always trust. But yeah, so the midfield will be better. I think we can trust that the MMA midfield will be better than Leggett and Kellen Acosta playing together. It's when you have Greg as a coach, when you're playing winter in Canada, when you have your best player coming off their worst game, there are a lot of variables that can change the course of the result of this Canada game and the rest of qualifying. And I'm almost kind of like at a loss to reliably predict anything at this point in this game. Like, I know that's kind of a cop-out, and that's not what you want to hear from, I don't know, your favorite two content creators on YouTube, but like it's very hard to sit down and like look across the board at everything that could possibly change between now and Sunday night. And, it's kind of baffling for just, if Christian Pulisic comes out and has a great game and they're missing Alphonso Davies and Eusakio and we win, like that's going to be normal life for everyone. If he comes out and has a bad game, if Eusakio is somehow back in time, if Jonathan David goes off, we're all kind of saying, well, we expected that as well. So there's a lot of variables. There's a lot of things that could happen, and there are a lot of realistic possibilities on either side of the fight in this game.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. One thing you said is like with Greg as your coach, I mean, how many matchups have we gone into where we think like, this is not the game for Greg, and then he comes through and somehow the U.S. pulls out like this crazy performance that wins. I mean, we've got a few trophies.
The Mexico games,
yeah.
The Honduras halftime, yeah.
Yeah, and the point that I'm kind of always been sitting on is that, Christian Pulisic, for as much as we've seen him with the national team, that was his first game with the MMA midfield, I think. Yeah. I don't know. There might have been one previous to World Cup qualifying, but certainly within World Cup qualifying, he hasn't played with that group. So maybe, and we did see more from him in that second half. It was better in the second half, and maybe that's something to grow on. But certainly expectations are going to be high. It's going to be a tense moment. It's going to be it's the moments like this that we're all excited about. This is why we're fans. For these big games, it's really exciting. And I know that we're certainly all going to be glued to the screen, Jake, I want to thank you for coming on and kind of having these. I like to think of them as like post-game therapy sessions, because I always feel like all of my anxiety and emotions, I kind of get them out after talking about them out with somebody. So I appreciate you for coming on for that. Can you, real quick, let everybody know where they can find your content?
Of course, man. Well, I also want to thank you and say I appreciate you for letting me become the most hosted guest on Yank Report. That's truly an honor. But yeah, so I host a channel called Fifamerica. We have 3 new videos a week. It's all dedicated to the U.S. men's national team. I have a podcast crew of Ryan and Tom and Manny that we also talk about the U.S. games with. And I am a USSF licensed coach. I'm currently living in England. I have a real job, but I'm also pursuing my UEFA licenses as well. So yeah, I really just like to talk about the game with a lot of rationality, passion, trying to implement some of those coaching things that I'm learning, and really just learn about the game and teach the game to everyone that's willing to listen, and just build passion into what is a really exciting time to be a US soccer fan. So if you guys want to check me out, the channel is Fifamerica. I'd love for you guys to come watch a video, and if you enjoy it, to like and subscribe.
Absolutely. Rationality and passion, 2 words that I would not always put together side by side. But I think that kind of sums up what it's like being a fan. Rationality and passion. One of those is going to win out. More often than not, it is the passion. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you're still watching at this point and you're not subscribed, you're a maniac. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button as well. It helps out the channel. Jump into the mix in the comments section. It is always wild during World Cup qualifiers. Thank you to everybody that's become a member. I've been putting up a few more members-only videos in the member section. Shout out to Mike Irish and Manuel Oliveras for being Tier 2 members. Thank you guys so much. My name is Sam, and this is the Yank Report brought to you by Bet Online.